Let's take a look at simple lights flickering in Unreal Engine. So I have this lantern model here, and when I hit play, you can see that they're flickering and the lights going up and down. So this would be nice if you've got all kinds of street lights or anything else, and you want to be able to manage some animation on it. But not only that, is every single time that you put a lantern in the scene, wouldn't it be nice that a light came with it to begin with, so that you don't have to put a light in the scene or a lantern in the scene and then a light inside the lantern each time and then set that up. It takes way more time. Wouldn't it be nice if you could just drag it into the scene and you've got a new one? So that's what we've got here. We're just taking a look at it. Under BP Asset, I have my lantern set up, and you can see that I've already got a lantern going. It's coming in very bright, and I've got some settings so I can take the intensity down, for instance, and dial that down. I can change the speed and the offset, sort of work on the offset, because the offset's actually random in the scene. So when you copy another one, the offset of each one isn't the same. So this is set up then to make it really easy to be able to add an asset because they're all put together. So let's have a look at how that is done then. So just quickly, this is my existing blueprint, and it's got a few things going on in it, and we're going to replicate some of this in a new one so that we can see all the components being put together. So I'm going to go to my asset blueprint folder here, and I'm going to pick new blueprint class, and I'm going to choose actor, and I'm going to call this new blueprint BP underscore lantern test in my case. And I'm going to open that up so that I have that open on the screen. So there are three tabs to begin with: viewport, construction script, and the event graph. Okay, so the viewport is what we're going to see, the models that we're going to be using, the lights that we're going to be adding. Construction script is the part that allows the user to be able to interact with it when they're building it. So in this case, my speed, my time offset, my intensity, even the glass material can be changed here. The attenuation of the light can be played with and worked with. So those things can be adjusted in the viewport here, and that is going to be the construction script. The event graph is what happens when we hit play and we start playing the game. So once we start playing the game, anything in here will get fired and be run every single time that we either start the game or even on event tick. So as the game is ticking over, it's going to be playing. So let's go to our viewport one and add some of our items in here. Now we want to add in a static mesh component. So I'm going to add in a static mesh. And this static mesh component I'm going to call lantern. And this is going to be our lantern mesh. And so over on the right side where our settings are, here's our static mesh. I'm going to go find lantern static mesh and set that. And probably should spell this right with an N in there. There you go. So there's our lantern in the scene. And in this case, maybe I want the pivot to be higher up. I've got the pivot on the actual object where it would be hanging, sort of thing. And so I'm going to move it up so it sits on the ground by default. Say about there. So there's this default scene root. In some cases, you want to get rid of this. In other cases, you don't want to. In this case, for me to be able to move this lantern from its original pivot point, I need the scene root because something has to be at 0, 0, 0. And in this case, it's going to be the default scene root object. So we've got the lantern in there. Now we want to add another component. And this is going to be a light, and we're going to add a point light in here. And you can see there's a hierarchy. The hierarchy doesn't have to exist this way, but this means that if I move the lantern, the light will move as well. So I'm going to call this lantern light. I would name things because it's going to make it easier for you to find certain things and identify certain things within your blueprints. So there's the lantern light. You can see the fall off here. We've got the intensity of the light, whatever the light's going to be. We've got the attenuation radius, which is this outside, but we're going to be controlling some of this stuff with our blueprint. So these settings are going to be overridden by our blueprint to begin with. So first, let's set it up so that we can use this just as a construction script without the flickering going on. And so to do that, we want to be able to set, let's say, the intensity of the light. So over here on the left-hand side, we have variables. And we're going to hit the plus sign for variables. And we're going to call this intensity. And once we have an intensity, we need to know what type of value it's going to be. So with this selected, you can see we've got settings over here on the right side, and we have variable type Boolean. We can also get that by clicking on the little icon right next door to it here, and it'll open up the same tool that you open up here. Now, the intensity can be any value, 0 to whatever. It can be 4.5, can be 10.0. And so that means it's a float value we're looking for. So we want this to be a float value. You can also see that beside it over on the left-hand side here that this little eyeball is turned off. We want that on, and we want to show that. And you can see that it says instance editable here is that eyeball actually. And what that means is it will show up in the viewport here to the end user. So with our intensity added, let's control the intensity of the light and be able to add these into the scene. So we're going to go over to our construction script, and we're going to need this somewhere in here to be able to control this light. So what are we going to need? We're going to need the light itself. So here's the light, and here's the intensity. Now, when we drag and drop it, it's going to say get intensity or set intensity. Well, we want to get the value that's stored in this variable. So we want to say get. All right, so what do we want to do? We want to set the intensity of the light. Let's right click and say set intensity. Now what you're going to find is under light components, light, you're going to see set intensity, and we've actually got a set intensity on lantern light. This is this lantern light here. It already knows that we have the lantern in the scene, and it's saying, hey, do you want a node that already uses that? So I'm going to click on that. You're going to notice what it makes is another one of these. Okay, so it's made a second one of these. We don't need the first one. So it actually knew already that it was in the scene, and it made the guess. It said, hey, you probably want to set it on the lantern light that you've already got in here. So with the set intensity, we need to fire it off on the construction script. So when the user inputs data, this is an event handler saying, hey, when the user's interacting with this, fire this event. And we're going to tell this event to fire the set intensity. So these all need to be chained together one after the other. And of course, what's the intensity going to be? Well, it's going to be the new intensity. So whatever that intensity is. And we want to set a default on the intensity here. You can see it says default, please compile the blueprint. So we're just going to hit compile, and you'll notice now we have the ability to set in one. So I'm going to go set this to something. I don't know, let's say 50. We'll see what it does when we hit it to 50. So the default for this is 50 now. I'm going to hit compile again, so it's compiled. We're going to go back to our level. You can see that we have this lantern test, and I even spelt it wrong here. So let's change that. There we go. And if I drag this out now, you can see it sits on the ground, and there is automatically a light in it. And we have this intensity spinner that allows us to be able to change the intensity of the light to whatever we want. So we already have a working blueprint that's going to make our life a lot easier, just putting in items that have got, for instance, in this case, a light to it. And we want to be able to have, maybe it's a street light, and we've got this, lantern there, and we want to be able to drop it in. It allows us to be able to do that right off the bat. So that's great. But let's go in and make this light flicker now. So this is allowing us to set the intensity, but when we hit play, we're going to have to go over to the event graph. And the event graph is going to be fired as we hit play, and it's either continues to be fired on something like event tick, or it's going to set in motion something that's happening within our scene. Now, we don't need the actor overlap. We don't need the event tick. We can get those and delete those, but we are going to be using the event begin play. So when we begin play, start doing this thing. And so same thing, we're going to set the intensity. So we're going to go back over here and say set intensity. And on what? On our lantern light again. We knew it was going to make that, so that's great. So let's set that intensity. What intensity we're going to set is going to be the set intensity. And if you notice, I just dragged and dropped it, and it didn't give me that little menu that said get or set. So when you drag and drop it, you get the get or set. But if you control drag it out, you'll get the get, and if you alt drag it out, you'll get the set. Okay, so I'm just going to drag it on there. The other thing we can do is just drag it right onto the input. So this is going to have now an input to it to change the intensity of this. So this is doing exactly what this is doing, but this isn't going to be flickering. So we need some way of making this flicker. So what we're going to do is we're going to add something else now. So I'm going to go in and we're going to add a timeline node, add timeline down here. And we're going to call this light flicker, and you want to name it again because we're going to have to be able to find it. Okay, when we do certain things with this, it's best to make sure you name these nodes because then we can locate them quickly. And so what a timeline is, if I double click on it, it's going to open yet a fourth tab now. So we have the viewport, construction, event, and the timeline tag. And in here, essentially, we can set up an animation curve. And so we were using a float value to control the intensity. It's just a single value. So we're going to add a float value curve in here. So now we have a float value curve, and we can essentially set up a function curve like you'd have in 3ds Max for animation. I'm going to make it about 2 seconds long. So I'm going to right click on the line, say add float here, add key here, and at 2 seconds, I'm going to say add key here. Current length is 5 seconds. I'm going to make it just 2 seconds. Okay, so we want to clip that off and make sure it's at 2 seconds. And I'm going to take both of these values and move them straight up so that they're probably about halfway up or whatever. Maybe something like that. I don't know if that's at 2 now. When you select one, you can see the value here. I don't know if you can actually, yeah, we could actually take the value to 0.5. How's that? I'll set them halfway up. So now the values are set there. We want to get a waveform going, a flicker effect happening in this waveform. So it's not going to go down below 0.5 and it's not going to go above 1 because we want to use this as a multiplier to the existing intensity. So the greatest intensity is going to be the intensity that we set, and it's going to flicker down lower than that value by multiplying it down. So I'm just going to make some keys in here, and we're just going to get it to flicker up and down over time, and maybe take that one up to 1-ish and then take this one down. Maybe this one goes down a little bit lower or something, and then so we're going to have this flickering effect where the peak is going to be the full value, and then it's going to step up and down. What's going to happen when we hit play is it's going to play this piece of animation in a sense and take a value out of this. But essentially that'll stop at 2 seconds. And after that, nothing else is going to happen. So we want to turn it on to loop. So it's going to loop through our 2 second length and just keep looping through this and outputting a value from this curve for us. Okay. So you could make these smooth or whatever else you happen to need. So now, back in our event graph, we want to fire this event. So we're going to say play. Okay, so we're going to put it in line with this and update. So as this updates, make sure you update the intensity. So what's the intensity? Is going to be this new track 0. Well, new track 0 doesn't mean anything to us. You can see it says new track 0 here. I'm going to right click. I'm going to say rename, and we're going to call this intensity again. Back to our graph, you can see it now, it's called intensity. So that's actually going to control the intensity of our light going up and down. Let's just hit compile, and let's go back to our scene where I've got the new light. I'm going to hit play, and if I look down, I don't know if we can see it. It's probably so subtle that the amount that it's going up and down, it's not doing anything here. We probably can't see it because it's the light amount is so low. Let's actually take the intensity way up, and then we'll hit play again. And you can see the intensities drop back down again, okay? And it's dropped back down again because we're just saying new intensity is the value of the curve, and the value of the curve goes from 0.5 to 1. So as soon as we hit play, it's overriding anything we've done in this construction curve with this timeline. So now how do we get this to work? Well, we want to use the timeline as a multiplier to our intensity. So I'm going to drag out of the intensity and just hit the multiplication over on the keypad. And we want float times float. So we want to multiply the float coming out of our curve here with our intensity, and then take the intensity into the new intensity of the light. So let's try that again now. We're going to hit compile. We're going to come back. And so here's our light, super bright. It should still be super bright when we look down, and you can see it going up and down and now pulsating up and down, down to, a little bit less than half of what the intensity is actually set at. So now our light is pulsing for us. So this is a really simple blueprint to start building out assets that have more functionality to them and capabilities to them, so that it's easier to be able to add assets that are already animated to our scenes.